Okay, so parties and interest groups, okay, neither of these necessarily have a great reputation or great associations with them right now. Political parties, people are often frustrated. They feel like there is too much polarization, as we talked about with public opinion. We'll talk a little bit more about party identification just a little bit down the line here. They're not necessarily seen as positive. They're seen as institutions, groups that do whatever they can to win, are far more interested in advancing themselves and their own candidates than they are in the good of the country. Interest groups largely seen the same way, okay? Collections of people who lobby for, as they sometimes say, special interests, okay? But special interests is, it's sort of a way of talking about somebody else's interests, right? When I care about something, when I have something that I'm focused on, I tend not to think of it as special interest, okay? It's kind of that same thing that happens with Congress. When somebody when a congressman or a senator or whatever is bringing federal funding into a different district or a different state, I see it as waste. I see it as pork barrel politics. When they're bringing it to mine, I approve of it. I like it. That's why I vote for them again. Okay, so both of these things, both institutions, parties and interest groups, are in a way positive because they are a way that people can join together and through collective action have more influence over policy than they might otherwise. In fact, almost certainly than they would otherwise. If you were just electing candidates based on who knows what, because parties also help people understand what a candidate is likely to do or what they're likely not to do. Obviously, it's not, you can't predict completely based on somebody's party affiliation, but you might have some sense of what they are or are not going to do, okay? And interest groups are a way for people to join together with like-minded citizens and promote particular things that they care about, okay? Here's one definition of an interest group: an organization of people with shared policy goals entering the policy process at several points to try to achieve those goals. Okay, and we'll talk more about the differences between interest groups and parties a little bit later. But basically, political parties are much more broad-based. They have positions on all kinds of questions, domestic, international, all sorts of policy statements that they have, positions that they have. Again, they may not carry out those things exactly, what's in their platform or what they seem to stand for. They may not carry those things out exactly when they get into office. And that may be because they're unable to because of divided government and things like that. But it may be because, they actually kind of back away from it, okay? But political parties have a broad-based, they might back away from it, by the way, just to finish that thought. They might back away from it because they may think that it's going to be popular with the party, but too unpopular or controversial with the population as a whole or the electorate as a whole, and therefore it may cost them in the next election. Or the elites may just decide that it's not good policy after all, or that it's going to hurt them with donors. There are all kinds of reasons why they may not carry out exactly what they say. But again, parties, they have these platforms, they have a position on a wide range of things. And the main type of action that they do is to try to elect their candidates to office, right? They try to actually take control of government by electing their candidates and then carry out the policy through legislation. Interest groups do not directly field candidates for office. And what they do, they enter as it says here, they enter the policy process at several points, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in terms of understanding interest groups, what they are, how they work, okay? So they're groups of people, they come together, they try to influence policy at different points, maybe through supporting one or endorsing one candidate or another in an election, maybe through lobbying already elected people, maybe through litigation, maybe all these things, okay? And they can be sort of policy specific, focused on something like abortion or immigration or gun control, or they can be, as they often are, and here we go back to Federalist 10, they can be focused on some sort of economic or financial interest. It can be a lobby group, and some of the most effective lobbying groups are lobbying groups for industries, for particular industry interests, okay? So they can be a straightforward industry lobbying group or a union lobbying for particular things that benefit them economically. Okay, so not necessarily a principled or a general policy outlook on the environment or immigration or whatever, but something that is going to benefit them in their business one way or the other. Okay, so there are different theories. People have three major theories, that kind of classic theories of how interest groups work, what they are, okay? There's pluralist theory, there's hyperpluralism, and then there's elite or leading class theory, okay? Pluralism and group theory, all kinds of different things, different ways you can say this, okay? But pluralism, basically, this is sort of the idea that you would have from Federalist 10. The basic idea is interest groups provide a key link between people and the government. Again, you may have a negative association with interest groups and even with political parties, But remember, they form an essential link between the citizens and the government, okay? If you really care about a particular issue that is not necessarily on the radar of a major party, you can join or even found an interest group and organize and work to try to change that, to try to advance policy objectives that are in line with what you want. You may find that there's already an interest group that represents your interest and what you care about, okay? In which case, again, you can join that interest group. So in something where the party may not care as much about your concerns or about these particular policy issues that you're focused on, you may find an interest group that can advance your policy goals far more effectively than simple membership in a party would. And certainly more effectively than writing letters on your own, just trying to operate as an individual citizen, okay? So the first idea of pluralism or pluralist theory of interest groups are that groups provide a key link between the people and the government. Again, they are basically a positive thing. They help democracy function and function better. And they help more people influence policy and communicate what they want to the government. Okay, the idea is groups compete. Okay, so you may have business, the kind of the capital or the management versus labor versus environmentalists. Okay, so different. You may have one group that really wants to drill for oil, and then the labor might be concerned with the wages for the workers, and then an environmental group may not want them to drill for oil at all. Okay, so you have different groups, and they're all competing to advance their vision of what good policy or what a good society looks like. Okay. No one group is likely to become dominant. This is one of the fundamental ideas of pluralism, that no one group or no small coterie or set of groups will become dominant. Groups usually play fair, okay? So again, you're not going to have groups influencing policy in an illegal or a dishonest way, okay? That would be bad, obviously, and make it far less effective. And groups weaken one resource can use another, okay? So a group with relatively few numbers that represents a relatively small segment of society, but it may a very small segment of society, they may represent a very wealthy segment of society. So they may not have many people, but they may have a lot of money to influence things. Another group that represents a large number of people that do not have as much money and are not as wealthy, they may have large numbers though. So if they can mobilize that interest group, they can affect change. They can do things that the lack of money isn't really a problem. Okay, so pluralism, this is meant to be a descriptive theory. Okay, a descriptive theory is just a theory of how things work. A prescriptive or a normative theory is this theory of how things should be or how they should work. Okay, pluralism, this is a fairly rosy picture, a fairly good picture of what interest groups are doing, but it's not meant to be a goal or a normative theory of how they should operate or what democracy should look like with interest groups. It's actually meant to describe what actually happens. Okay. So all three of these are descriptive theories, but pluralism is the only one that has a positive view of interest groups, okay? So there is pluralism, and again, it's very familiar from Federalist 10. Basically the idea, a lot of different interest groups will form, they will compete, they will have to cooperate and compromise, they will create basically democratic policy, popular rule will flourish, and you'll get a decent, basically more or less good system in which most people get at least some of what they want. Nobody is completely just running wild and getting everything that they want at the expense of everybody else. And people will be able to understand that that's the way that it is, okay? So that's pluralism. Again, this is a descriptive theory. This is actually what they're saying does happen, okay? Hyperpluralism, another theory, again, this is a descriptive theory, just saying this is what actually happens with interest groups. Hyperpluralism basically agrees with pluralism that there are a lot of different groups and that they are all relatively powerful, that they all have influence in some way or another, okay? What hyperpluralism finds is that you don't get a good democratic, basically coherent policy or process out of it. What you get is a fragmented, incoherent policy and a fragmented and incoherent government and set of government regulations, okay? So you get conflicting regulations, you have ever more graphic and ever more authoritative and intense statements about the harms of smoking tobacco, while you also have government subsidies to get people to keep farming tobacco to make that possible. Okay, so let's either just suppress growing tobacco or let them fail and go out of business, or let's let it happen and then let people use their product. But you get this kind of conflicting, on the one hand, nobody should ever use tobacco because it causes cancer. On the other hand, we're going to make sure that people can continue to grow this terrible, carcinogenic, noxious thing. doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? But that's hyperpluralism. You have health, you have, in a way, just the simple, straightforward fact, right? Smoking is extremely destructive of people's health. And people, again, this is an example of people lobbying for something that is not really in their interest in any obvious way. I mean, maybe they feel strongly because they lost a relative to lung cancer or some other thing from smoking, but they're just really just trying to make people healthier and, better in that way. But then you have tobacco farmers that represent a particular fairly narrow economic interest, but because they have so much at stake, they might be very effective as an interest group. We'll talk about that in a second. Sometimes the most effective interest groups are relatively small, but they are motivated, okay? So the issue, hyperpluralism says pluralism, again, kind of agrees with pluralism, that you have many different interest groups, that they all have a hand in making policy, that they all have real influence. But the conclusion that hyperpluralism draws is not that this is good and democratic, but that this is incoherent and creates policy that doesn't make any sense, or also just creates gridlock, okay? Because there are so many different groups and they are all effectively influential, it's impossible to satisfy them all. And therefore, government does nothing, or you get gridlock or paralysis, okay? So hyperpluralism and pluralism both agree that there are many different interest groups and that they all have some influence over policy. Pluralism thinks that you basically get a decent, good, democratic, and more or less coherent and more or less effective and good policy and set of government regulations and whatnot out of it. Hyperpluralism agrees that there are many interest groups, they all have influence, but they think either you get incoherent and bad policy or no policy at all because you get gridlock because it's impossible to satisfy all these groups. Okay, the final theory, elite and class theory, there are different, again, different ways that you can kind of tweak the name, but elite theory disagrees with the other two about the power or the influence of most interest groups, okay? Elite theory says that power is concentrated in a relatively few hands rather than dispersed among many different interest groups that represent the population as a whole, okay? They say that the number of groups is really unimportant. Only a few major corporations, and with some of the changes to campaign finance laws, maybe a few major donors, a few major party donors, really have massive influence. The other groups are relatively insignificant. The largest corporations, they have enormous power. Individuals are often, they might be the director of a company and also on the board of trustees of a hospital or a university or something else, as well as a major donor to a powerful politician. Okay, and understand this is not a conspiracy theory. They're not saying that these people are meeting in secret and carrying out plans and hatching conspiracies and making them happen. They're saying that it's somewhat in the open and that the influence can be somewhat indirect, okay? But more than anything, they're saying that there's a very clear through donations and also through influence on the media. Because again, if you're a massive corporation and you're buying ads, you're buying advertising, certainly in a local newspaper, and even on, again, if you're talking about large enough corporations, even in the national media, you're gonna have a lot of influence over how they report on you, right? Over how they report on your particular company or business, and maybe how they report on your entire industry, okay? So there can be indirect influence through things like advertising, right? These massive corporations, if you report too hard, if you ask too many questions that are difficult or show them in a really negative light, talk about some of the things that they're doing that are bad, they will pull advertising, okay? As well as the influence that they have through donations and things like that, okay? So elite theory says that basically the very wealthy, especially corporations, sometimes very wealthy individuals, have all the real power in shaping policy in the United States, okay? Smaller groups may have some influence, over some window dressing, over some minor decisions, but corporate elites really control the rest, okay? So those are the three major theories of how interest groups actually do operate. Again, elite, hyperpluralist, pluralist, or pluralism, hyperpluralism, elite theory, okay? They are all descriptive. They are all meant to describe how things are actually happening. Obviously, only pluralism presents a good view of only pluralism would seem like it could be a normative theory of how things should work, right? So these are three different, not necessarily entirely incompatible theories, right? You may think that sometimes elite theory holds sway, sometimes one of the others, okay? But those are the three major theories. Those are the details, okay, of how interest groups actually work in the United States, okay? So what makes an interest group successful? Large groups are relatively ineffective, okay? They can be very effective if they can be motivated, but oftentimes large groups are relatively ineffective, okay? Smaller groups, what really makes the difference usually is intensity. How motivated are the members, okay? If they are very motivated to give money or to contact decision makers or both, a relatively small interest group can be very effective. And again, some of the most effective interest groups are actually interest groups that deal with, that again, lobby for a particular industry, for a particular, like propane wholesale sellers, okay? Very narrow, they have a lot at stake. And of course, most people aren't thinking a lot about regulations of how to sell wholesale propane, right? I mean, obviously it can explode. It's not something you want to be totally indifferent to, but again, who's paying attention to that unless you're actually the people selling it, right? So that can be a very effective interest group, in part because its focus is so narrow, nobody else cares, and they have a strong incentive to do that. So large groups, obviously, if you have a large group and all the members are intense and committed, that's powerful, right? You're going to have a lot of influence that way. But large groups by themselves are often ineffective, okay? It's intensity, it's how committed, it's how motivated are they to see these policy goals realized, and then financial resources. And again, that could come from a relatively small number of people, or it could come from many people who, again, are motivated and so on enough to actually make this happen. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Oh, sorry, habit, it's a recording, nobody's here. I hope that makes sense to you, but okay, how interest groups shape policy. So we said before, parties tend to what they do is they field candidates, they try to win office, they try to influence, not even influence policy, but create policy and enact it through legislation and executive orders and whatever else, right? Interest groups intervene at various points. Okay, the most common way, or probably the most visible way, is lobbying. Okay, and here's a definition: a communication by someone other than a citizen acting on his or her own behalf, directed to a governmental decision maker with the hope of influencing his or her decision, okay? So lobbying is a communication by somebody who is not a citizen acting on their own behalf, okay? So if you contact your representative or your senator or the governor or the mayor or whoever and argue for a particular action by the government or policy or whatever, or argue against it, that's not lobbying, that's you being a citizen. Lobbying is when some third party acts for somebody. And it comes back to the days when most members of Congress, actually their homes were in their home districts or home states, and they only came to the Washington, D.C. when Congress was in session, which was not necessarily that large a part of the year, okay? And so they stayed in hotels, so the lobbyists would be people who waited in the hotel lobby and tried to stop them when they came in or out and talk to them and, lobby them and kind of encourage them, convince them of what the lobbyists wanted them to do, okay? So eventually they became known as lobbyists. Now we have this word lobbying, okay? And that's when obviously, and usually they hire somebody. And some of these lobbyists are, very expensive. They charge very high rates because they're very successful, okay? So lobbying is, again, probably the most common, probably the most visible, most well-known way that interest groups try to shape policy. There's also electioneering. In other words, getting directly involved in the electoral process by supporting one candidate or another, endorsing them, possibly even running ads for them, though they cannot coordinate with the candidate's campaign, okay? But they can obviously intervene. They can also just make donations, obviously, right? That's a very common way and a very relatively effective way to do that, to say, here, we're making a donation. Remember who your friends are when you're elected and so on, okay? So they can sometimes advertise, but of course, just donations to candidates is a major way that interest groups influence policy. Okay, litigation, sometimes there are laws already on the books, but they're not being enforced, or they're not being enforced very well or very rigorously. So they can sue and force the government to carry out these laws that are already on the books that basically a different special interest group has lobbied the government kind of to back off on, okay? And that's the thing about lobbying. One obvious group you might lobby is elected officials, members of Congress, for instance, but you might also lobby members of the executive branch, the bureaucrats who are charged with enforcing or carrying out these these laws, right, passed by Congress, signed by the president, and then given to a particular branch or a particular department in the executive branch and charged with carrying it out. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. they are supposed to monitor a lot of things by statute. There are laws telling them that they are supposed to monitor certain things, but lobbyists can go to members of the EPA. First of all, they can go to the president and encourage the president to nominate somebody who will be more friendly to their industry to be head of the EPA. They can lobby, or again, they can influence this through donations to members of Congress to, confirm this person, members of the Senate. And then they can lobby that person, that individual themselves, to interpret the law in a particular way, or to put their priority on doing something that is, basically going to cost the particular interest group or that industry less money. Okay, so maybe that has happened, and therefore laws are on the books that are not being enforced as effectively or as rigorously or as whatever as they could be. And so a different interest group might go and sue and say, hey, this statute says that you have to do X, Y, Z, and the EPA, the federal government, whatever, is not doing that. Okay, so litigation is another way that interest groups can shape policy by, basically taking the government to court and trying to force them through court order, through court decision, to actually enforce laws that for whatever reason they are being somewhat lackadaisical about. Okay, finally, appeals to the public relations, okay, in a way, the ultimate way, in some ways the hardest, right? But also, I mean, if you can change public opinion and make them see your issue in the way that you do, in a way that's more effective than anything else, right? If the public thinks that way, then they're going to vote that way. And politicians are going to reflect and policymakers are going to reflect what the public thinks. So if you can change public opinion, that's also a good way to do it. Again, on some issues, they might be relatively narrow enough that the public doesn't really pay attention or have opinions. On other things like gun control, right, that you might try very hard to influence public opinion, because again, as the public believes things or doesn't believe things, politicians will often reflect that. There are obviously ways that interest groups can, promote the ideas and the interests and the preferences of small minorities. But public opinion, at least in theory, is one very powerful way to influence politicians and, again, members of government, policymakers. So that's another way that interest groups definitely focus their attention and try to shape policy by shaping public opinion.